Is the volume good? Yeah, sounds good. I feel like I'm so far away from all of you. So thank you all for coming to this weekend. This is my second time teaching here at Jamyang. I'm very happy to be invited back. What prayers do you usually do for the basic program? Does someone... You just start at the beginning, or do you? Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. Okay. The full prayers that follow? Okay. And then mandala offering. So we'll just do the short mandala, brief mandala, and then refuge. Okay. So do you do this in Tibetan or English? English? English sounds good to me. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides, then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who were wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure. Wisdom, ocean like a great mountain. Fame that blazes in the 3 worlds. Winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust-free like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagawan was dwelling on Massa Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, quickly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates so as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared: Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. So then let's go to, again, page 16. Let's do this in Tibetan, page 16, just the brief mandala prayer and then the Idam Guru. Sajipoki Shukshing Metok Trahamri Rablingji Nidegan Hadi Sangye Shingdu Mikte Uwari Dokunam Dakshina Chupasho Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then Refuge in Bodhicitta on page 20. We'll do this once in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar sho Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gipe sonam gi drola penchir sangye drupar sho. Okay, you can set the prayer books aside. Let's do a short meditation before we begin the session. Just a chance to clarify our motivation. So we're going to begin with just a few minutes of focused meditation on the breath to calm the mind. And then I'll lead you in a short reflection. So again, we use whatever technique works for your mind in terms of meditating on the breath. Try to keep the mind present with the breath. Whenever the mind gets distracted, return to the breath. So now let's set our motivation for this weekend. The starting point for all the Buddhist teachings is this idea that each of us and every single sentient being is fundamentally the same in our basic desire to be happy, to not suffer. And as we know from the Buddhist teachings, we've simply been going about this task in the wrong way, trying to create the causes of happiness with only what brings suffering. And every time we try to avert suffering, we simply compound our suffering. So this weekend in particular, we're looking at teachings at how we transform those experiences that we call suffering into an amazing opportunity to deepen our compassion, our commitment to others, to work on ourselves, to become more capable to benefit them. So we have an opportunity this weekend to go beyond even just the basic teachings of the Buddha, to look at these Mahayana techniques of training our minds to be able to confront every situation with skillful means. So it is important then that we generate a very sound foundation of bodhicitta for this weekend. Recall from your own training the techniques that are involved in cultivating that mind, understanding the situation that ourselves and all beings are in, generating that compassion and love that wants to free every single one of them from that situation, bring them to the bliss of Buddhahood. And to recognize that we simply are not capable in our current state of accomplishing that goal. That we need this accompanying motivation of becoming a Buddha for the sake of accomplishing the welfare of all beings. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche frequently points out, the main goal is all sentient beings. They are the object of bodhicitta. But we recognize that we have to become enlightened in order to accomplish their welfare. So generate that motivation in your own heart now, so that everything we do throughout today, through the following days, throughout this entire life, and even beyond, becomes the cause for that result. Bringing every single sentient being to enlightenment through our own accomplishment of the state of Buddhahood. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully and we'll begin. So I thought since we are spending some time together, it'd be useful for people to do a brief introduction. So if maybe we could just go around the room and I could at least hear your name. If you are studying the basic program here, if this is, you're here because of that, to be able to complete that requirement, maybe let me know that. And if anything else you want to share, but try to keep it somewhat brief, so we don't end up, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we're still here doing introductions. So again, I know a number of you in the room. I'll introduce myself very briefly. You probably read some kind of bio or something that they had, but I've been studying the Dharma, studying is maybe a loose word in the early years, but since 1993, so this is like 25 years now. It's hard to believe, but I did spend some time at the master's program in Italy from 1998 until the end of 2004, and since then I've been teaching mostly in Santa Fe, New Mexico. But the last few years I've been out on the road more because we have Geshe Tupten Sherab there, who some of you may know. He's our resident Geshe for half the year, and then when he leaves, I return and I'm the resident teacher. So we take turns being out on the road and being at home for each for half the year. So anyway, I'm happy to be here. Maybe we could start over there as you're drinking your water. Sorry. Good. Good to see you again, Steph. Yeah.
Don't throw any balls unexpectedly.
Really?
Sorry. I have that visual image of me.
Yeah.
When I think of you, I have that visual image.
Yeah. From a workshop we did. Nat can tell you about it too. Okay.
I'm Francesca, so I'm on the basic program. Before this, I did Geshe Tashi's last foundation at the sport campus course with the university. I did
Right.
that.
Good.
And I've come to Jamyang since 2010. Quite new.
Okay. Not that new, but thanks, Francesca.
My name is Emilia. I took refuge 3 years ago, and I came here. I live in Sweden, but I came here because we talked back in 2015 at Copan. I went there to talk to him, and I had some opportunity to come and see you again and be here for the teachings. I didn't know they were going to be broadcast, but anyhow, it's good to be here. And I started the basic program, but elsewhere, not here at Jamyang.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay. Good to see you again, Amelia. Would you like to go?
Yes, my name is Adam.
Adam.
I don't know very much about Buddhism.
Okay.
I've studied a lot of yoga, and a friend of mine recommended because he's studying Buddhism. So I'm not actually on the basic program.
Okay.
But I'm very interested in Tibetan Buddhism.
Okay. Good. Yeah, I'm hoping I can keep the weekend geared for the basic program students, but also for anyone like you who's, a bit newer to Buddhism and that to get what you can out of it. So good. Thanks, Adam.
My name is Sabina. I'm a volunteer here. I'm not doing a basic program, but I'm
Yeah.
still very happy to study.
Yeah. Thanks, Sabina. It's good to see you again, too.
I'm Tony. I'm on BD.
Yeah. Good.
Been studying practice now since the early 90s. Very several different schools and things.
Good. Good to meet you, Tony. Yeah.
I'm Alison, and I encountered Dharma for the first time in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And I also do the basic program. I just want to apologise in advance because I've got a few things that I need to do during the day, so I will have to consider that for a few sessions.
You have my permission. A big load off your shoulders. It's good to see you, Alison.
My name is Nat, and I've been coming here like Francesca since 2010, and I'm also on the basic program.
Good to see you, Nat.
I'm Jo. I'm on the basic program. Just really interested. It's here before that, and I've been here since about 2012. So.
Okay, good. Great. Thanks, Joe. Yeah.
I'm a Catholic. I've been doing it since 2010, Dharma practice. I've done Geshe Tashi's basic program, not basic program, foundation program, twice, and Mandarin twice or once. I didn't do the basic program. I don't think I'll definitely not on it now.
Right.
I hear everyone on the basic program, I think myself, what's happening?
Yeah.
I'm missing out.
Dear life.
I remember doing it earlier on, 10 years ago. I haven't continued.
All right. Great. Thanks, Patrick.
I'm Andras, I'm from Budapest.
What's your name? I'm sorry.
Andras.
Andras.
I'm from Budapest, I just came over.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I heard that you were.
For the basic program.
Okay.
And before that I did the 2 online programs, Geshe Tashi, FPMT, and the Wellbeing Courses.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for coming all that distance. Wow, wonderful.
I am Steve, here since 1998. I'm fortunate enough to study the foundation of Buddhist thought from Wellbeing Courses, and I think it's the 5th or 6th module of this program. I'm not actually on it because I spent half my time in the years.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much for coming.
Okay. So those of you who are curious about the basic program, there's lots of information at the FPMT's website, and I'm sure other people can help you here. So I'm not going to go into a whole explanation of what that's all about. But the one thing to keep in mind for those of you who are on the basic program track is that there is a final exam and a review and all that happens that is required to get full certification for that. But I also have prepared quizzes and an exam for this course, and if you want to do that, you're certainly welcome to do that. And I don't know, I think all of that was sent to you in advance. There were a lot of files that I provided to Mike, so I think he's given you all that information. But if you have any questions about that, you can let me know. So I realize I am facing a challenge in terms of timing for this weekend. I've taught this text 2 or 3 times before, and the last time I did it was at Land of Medicine Buddha last summer, and we had 2 weekends, and I was able to fit it into both weekends, and that felt a little tight. So now I've got like 3 days, so we'll see if I'm able to get through the entire text, but I'm kind of confident that we will be able to at least do justice to most of it. It'll be like when the lamas teach and they get to the end and they start running through all the verses really quickly. The very first time I had teachings on this text was probably in '97, I think, at our center in San Francisco, at Tsechen Ling. There was a visiting teacher named Venerable Ling Gongkar Toku, who did a weekend on this text as well. So he just crammed it all into a weekend and did that same style of just reciting the verses towards the end, didn't really do much commentary. Since then, I've studied it primarily using my teacher, Geshe Jampa Gyatso's commentary, that when he did the basic program, taught the basic program after the master's program that I attended. So I'd like to start with just doing a little introduction into the subject matter, so that those of you who are new, as well as even just some of us who have been around a bit, have some idea. We can go to the next slide that just says introduction, then go to the next slide after that. And I've divided this into 4 parts. The first one that we'll talk about is an introduction to this term we call Lojong. This weekend was advertised as mind training, which is one translation of this word. By the way, there was one handout that you were sent that was just called an introduction handout, and it had some text on it regarding mind training, regarding the twin demons, these subjects that we're going to be going through. Do some of you have that? It's useful if you have it in a printed form and can look at it, but if you don't, that's okay. You didn't receive it? Okay. That's the outline. I'll be going through the outline shortly. That'll be the last of these subjects. But that one, I think, yeah. Maybe we could have someone run off a few copies if that's possible. Is it possible to? Yeah. How many people need a copy of that, would like a copy of that don't have one right here, right now? 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
I'll do 10.
So this genre of teachings that's come to be known as Lojong, I mean, we could say everything that the Buddha taught is mind training. You know, mind is the workshop that the Buddha has his expertise in and that we always are working with in terms of our developing various qualities. So the Buddha is not about, of course, changing the external world, it's about changing our internal world. So in that way, we could say everything that the Buddha taught is mind training. But we're specifically looking this weekend at this genre of teachings that's come to be known as mind training or Lojong, that is within the Mahayana tradition, within this greater scope of the Lam Rim. So this involves maybe giving just a short background to what we mean by the Lam Rim, the different levels of training our minds that the Buddha teaches. Most of you have some background in Lam Rim, but I'll just do a very brief review. So the Lam Rim, the stages of the path, is a structure for how we go about cultivating realizations, how we go about changing our minds from our ordinary state all the way to the state of Buddhahood. And so if you were to study the entire corpus of what the Buddha taught, all the sutras, you would probably spend your entire life reading through them, if you could even have them in the language that you could read, and not really discerning what you need to practice, because the teachings are spread out throughout the 45 years of the Buddhist discourses. So what the Lam Rim is a structure to be able to encapsulate the essential teachings that we need to engage in. So it's a structure that's used in this Gelugpa tradition to a large degree, but every one of the Tibetan Buddhist traditions has its own version of this. In the Tibetan, or the Gelugpa version, we have 3 levels. The very first level, the mind training of a person of least capacity, is the person who is primarily focused on their next rebirth, trying to create the causes to have a good rebirth. So the teachings there are mostly around recognizing the fragility of this life, that this life will come to an end, that we need to be concerned about our future existence because based on what we probably have been doing in past lives, we haven't created the causes for a good existence. Therefore, we need to take refuge and have a good understanding of karma, engage in proper behavior that will lead us to that good rebirth. The second level of the teachings that are the mind training for the person of middling capacity are geared at the person who wants to transcend this cycle of existence. What we call samsara, going from life to life, propelled by our karma and our delusions to continue to experience dissatisfaction. So this is where the teachings on the Four Noble Truths are taught. Again, I'm not going to go through all of that level of explanation. Most of you have that background. But it's to give us the good understanding of why we're in the state that we're in and how that can actually be changed. We can attain nirvana, we can attain peace when we've completely removed all of the causes of our state of dissatisfaction. So that's the second level. The third level is where we look beyond our own situation. The first 2 levels were just about ourselves. I call them compassion for ourselves, really understanding our own situation and wanting it to change for ourselves because we've had enough of our own suffering. And then we have to open our eyes to the reality, though, that all beings are suffering. So this is the motivation that we created at the beginning of today, and that is the motivation of the person who's practicing the mind training of great capacity, where we go beyond our own limited self-concern to embrace concern for the welfare of others. So this is what we're primarily looking at in terms of these Lojong teachings, is how do we use everything that we meet, particularly the difficult situations in our lives, the problems, the illness, the suffering of all kinds of types, to be able to cultivate a deeper compassion for others in our own hearts on the basis of that. So we'll be looking at some of the techniques that revolve around bodhicitta, bodhicitta being set out in 2 different ways, but primarily the one that we'll be working with has to do with our understanding of the need to become enlightened for the sake of others. And then we'll look at the teachings on emptiness that we unite with that mind, but there'll be more on bodhicitta coming. So does everyone have a handout or some access to that at this point? So what I've done is essentially just explain that first point that is from Geshe Tupten Chönyi about the different levels of mind training. As he says there, since this is a Mahayana text, these teachings are meant for someone of great capacity, someone who can practice these teachings for the benefit of all sentient beings. So, we don't have to feel like we've got this mind at some deep level of realization. We just have that aspiration to practice at this level, to be here not for our own sake alone, but for the sake of all beings. So then there's a nice little introduction from Thupten Jinpa's translation of this collection of mind training texts. These texts, again, go back to about 1,000 years ago. Many of you know the story of Lama Atisha, this great Indian master who was invited to come to Tibet to spread the Dharma. The Dharma had already been in Tibet for a few centuries before that, but there was a need for kind of a reinvention of the Dharma to make sure that people were on track with the teachings and really incorporating the sutra teachings, not just the tantric teachings. So Lama Atisha came and brought with him the full corpus of all the Mahayana teachings. And he taught primarily to the Tibetan disciple named Don Tompa these techniques that have come to be known as Lojong. And then from Don Tompa, he taught them to his students, and they continued on, and there are many great masters of that first century or so after Atisha that are renowned for having disseminated this Lojong tradition. So Thupten Jinpa explains here that this Tibetan term Lojong is composed of 2 syllables. The first Tibetan word there is lo. You can go to the next slide, by the way, Sabina. This first word lo is generally translated as mind or awareness, consciousness. And then jong is training, transformation, So as he says here, Lo could stand for mind, thoughts, attitudes. Jang connotes several interrelated but distinct meanings. First can refer to training, whereby one acquires a skill or masters a field of knowledge. But Jang can also connote habituation or familiarization with specific ways of being and thinking. And then third can refer to cultivating specific mental qualities, such as universal compassion or the awakening mind, bodhicitta, that I just mentioned. And then finally, it can connote cleansing or purification, as in purifying one's mind of craving, hatred, and delusion. So this is, again, I wouldn't say any one of these has the full meaning of what we talk about in terms of Lojong. They're all aspects of how we use Lojong. So it says here, all these different meanings carry the salient idea of transformation, whereby a process of training, habituation, cultivation, and cleansing induces a profound transformation, a kind of metanoesis. A metanoesis, I had to look up that word. I don't know that word. It's a type of change in the mind that has the power to even alter the world that we live in, to kind of change the world around us by virtue of it. From the ordinary deluded state, whose modus operandi is self-centeredness, to a fundamentally changed perspective of enlightened other-centeredness. This is a key theme that we'll be talking about through this weekend. A kind of movement away from that narrow perspective of just looking at ourselves to embracing the welfare of others, and using this mind training technique in that way primarily. Broadly speaking, as I've said previously, all the teachings of the Buddha and their associated commentarial explanations can be characterized as mind training in all four senses described above. However, what we are concerned with here is the emergence in Tibet of a specific genre of teaching. In this special usage, mind training refers to specific approaches for cultivating the altruistic awakening mind. Again, bodhicitta, especially through the practice of equalizing and exchanging self and others, as found in Shantideva's 8th century classic, A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. That text is also part of the basic program, and I think was taught here previously. When used in this sense, the term mind training represents an abbreviation of the fuller expression mind training in the Mahayana, or Mahayana mind training. So this is, again, why we give that label to this course in general, as it's Mahayana mind training. It's training ourselves to use whatever we meet to awaken our hearts, awaken our compassion, our desire to benefit others. So the next slide just gives a little quote that comes from some teachings, once more from, this is from Geshe Lundap Sopa in the book Peacock in the Poison Grove, which is concludes his commentary on this text, as well as another text that Dharmarakshita wrote. And he actually described Lojong in this way: mental purification through repeated practice of the thought intent on enlightenment. This another term for bodhicitta. So bodhicitta, the awakened mind, awakening mind, mind intent on enlightenment, enlightened mind, lots of different names for this. It essentially consists of these two words, bodhi and citta. Bodhi, the same root as Buddha, which means to awaken or become enlightened, and citta, which is mind. So this is that mind that wishes to become awakened for the sake of others. So this will be, again, the main theme throughout this weekend. Then there's another quote on the next slide, which is from my teacher, Geshe Jampa Gyatso, in his commentary on this text. He says, we need to train our mind so that it becomes one entity with conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. So the text is structured around these two ideas that I'm going to explain a little bit right now, because I think it is important that we have some understanding of what the differentiation between conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. So again, I just described bodhicitta as the mind that wishes to become a Buddha for the sake of others, wishes to become enlightened for the sake of others. That is what we usually call conventional bodhicitta, which is our developing that mind on the basis of our compassion and love that is observing other beings in their state of suffering, wanting to benefit them because we feel a closeness to them, we recognize the kindness that they've shown us. There are traditional techniques that are set out for cultivating that mind. Again, I'll cover those in very brief a little bit later in the course. But that mind is a conventional mind. It's not a mind that is going beyond just the conventional world that we live in. It's observing sentient beings, understanding their suffering, their lack of happiness, wanting to benefit them, and recognizing we can do that if we're fully enlightened. Whereas ultimate bodhicitta is when we combine that conventional bodhicitta with the mind that is doing a deeper investigation of reality. And the Lojong teachings, as we'll see, always try to address both aspects of bodhicitta. You know, even in Geshe Chikawa's text, which many of you have studied, the 7-point mind training, there is a combination of teachings that deal with our conventional understanding of the world and how we use that to increase our compassion and care and concern for others. But then there is also the deeper investigation into the nature of reality. When we unite this bodhicitta, this wish to become a Buddha, with that investigation into reality and discern emptiness, the wisdom of emptiness, which we will explore towards the end of this course because it's the final few verses of the text, then you call it ultimate bodhicitta, which is actually at the level where you have that realization of emptiness in a non-conceptual way. Again, I'll talk about that as we go through. I'm alluding to a lot of things that there'll be further explanation as we go through the course. But essentially what we mean then in distinguishing these is this first one, conventional bodhicitta, is that simple aspiration that we cultivate at a very deep level. They say actually to get it at a level where it becomes your entry into the Mahayana path, we have to have it combined with a pretty deep level of meditation. But it's still a conceptual mind. It's a mind that is, again, observing beings and wanting to become enlightened for their sake. But then when we achieve this non-conceptual realization of emptiness on the basis of bodhicitta, which happens further along the path, then we call that an ultimate bodhicitta, because it's a more ultimate understanding of the nature of reality. So these two we'll be discussing again quite a bit throughout this weekend. The primary subject of this text is conventional bodhicitta. But nonetheless, we always introduce ultimate bodhicitta as part of the mind training because it is quite essential to being able to accomplish the goal of Buddhahood. So these two minds of conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta have their specific targets. They have things that they are trying to counteract. And this is, of course, the whole premise of what the Buddha is saying, is that we have states of mind that we need to combat, that we need to address, and that we need to annihilate even, and replace them with minds that are grounded in wisdom, a wisdom that is understanding conventional reality correctly, seeing things correctly in that way, but then this deeper view of reality that we have to cultivate. So the opposing minds that we are trying to address are in the next slide and in the next subject. These are frequently called the twin demons that we fight in our mind training texts in Lojong. Excuse me. It's strange to be talking straight through. Last 6 weeks I've been in countries where I've had to be translated. So I would just teach a single sentence and then listen to the translator and then teach a single sentence. So now I'm like having to keep going again. It feels very strange. So we have these twin demons, these two aspects of our mind that are the main opponents, the main forces that we need to address through conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. The most evident one that we can see operating in our lives is this mind that we call self-cherishing. Self-cherishing is just the traditional word that's used. Some people have issues with this word cherishing because who doesn't cherish themselves at some level? I mean, we all do have that kind of innate level of self-concern. But when we call it cherishing, we're elevating it to a state of self-centeredness, where we really are looking at ourselves and being primarily focused on our own welfare, as we'll see when we get into the descriptions of this that are provided in the text or in your handout there. The other state of mind is this deeper error that we have that is what ultimate bodhicitta is trying to combat. And this is our misunderstanding of the nature of ourselves. This word self gets thrown around a lot in Buddhism, and it's very confusing if you're new. If you've been around, then you kind of get acclimated to when it's used to refer to a self that doesn't exist and when it's used to refer to a self that does exist. So it's a little confusing in that regard. But when we use it in the term self-grasping, we're mostly talking about a grasping at a view of ourselves that is totally erroneous, totally fiction, that we've created around who we are. Believing that there's an inherent intrinsic identity here, then we defend that self and protect that self and do everything we can from the basis of that misunderstanding. So this self-grasping is a mind that has been with us since beginningless time and is the harder error to address. But nonetheless, I'm not saying the first one's easy. The first one also takes a lot of skill. And that's why we spend a good portion of the text trying to address self-cherishing or self-centeredness, self-preoccupation. That's also another word that's sometimes used. So let's look at the passages that are there that go into a little bit of a description about what these two minds are about, these twin demons. This is from Glenn Mullen's text, Training the Mind in the Great Way, which is a commentary on that text I mentioned by Geshe Chikawa earlier, the 7-point mind training. He says, the principal feature of the Lojong approach is that it identifies the obstacles to enlightenment as being twofold. The first of these is chezen, or the self-cherishing attitude, the habit of always placing ourselves above others and of working to benefit ourselves at others' expense. This is the great mischief maker that brings conflict and disharmony into our world and that causes us to harm others. It is the greatest single enemy to our peace of mind. So this is, as I said, the more evident one that we're going to be addressing throughout this weekend is this tendency that we have to become primarily focused on ourselves. The second obstacle, Glenn Mullen says, is dakzen, or ego-grasping, self-grasping, the I-holding ignorance. This refers to the instinctive belief in a truly existent self, the grasping attitude of seeing something independent and truly existent within ourselves, as well as external phenomena. Now, again, when we're talking about it in this context, we're going to be mostly talking about the person that is ourselves and focusing on the grasping we have to that identity. But we have this grasping with regard to everything that exists. Again, we'll be exploring this towards the end of this course, this ignorance that is operative in so much of our behavior. It's what's the root of all of our suffering. What is keeping us in an unenlightened state primarily is this ignorance. Nonetheless, we see, again, our conventional bodhicitta is being thwarted by our self-cherishing, by our tendency to think about ourselves alone and to not be as concerned about the welfare of others. So we have to address that one as well. Now, this paragraph that we see next, that says the second of the above two obstacles, this one, we'll be examining this shortly, because this isn't something that is that clear-cut in terms of which of these is causing which, or how do these two operate. He says here, the second of the above two obstacles is in fact deeper than the first, for were it not for the I-grasping habit, self-cherishing would not arise. We'll see that there's a debate around that, about whether that is actually so. And we'll talk about that shortly. He says, nonetheless, both must be identified and counteracted, for both are constantly creating problems for us. Again, the harder to identify, the deeper error is the self-grasping. But both have to be confronted if we are ever to achieve Buddhahood, if we're ever to be of true benefit to others. So then Glenn Mullen says the Lojong method inspires enlightenment within us by eliminating these two syndromes and by replacing them, respectively, with great compassion and the blissful wisdom of emptiness. So great compassion is the root for what our conventional bodhicitta is generated from. The blissful wisdom of emptiness, when it's united with that bodhicitta, becomes ultimate bodhicitta that we discussed earlier. The Lojong approach for eliminating these two obstacles is known as the method for cultivating the two types of bodhicitta, or enlightenment mind, the conventional bodhi mind of love and compassion, and the ultimate bodhi mind of the wisdom of emptiness. The techniques for cultivating these two bodhi minds constitute the main substance of the Lojong training. So we're going to have a slide a little bit later that goes into all the different aspects that can be lined up in this sort of dual view. I know Buddhism is sometimes propounded as being about everything's one and there's no dualism at all. Well, there's dualism in our understanding of the world nonetheless. When you get to the state of Buddhahood, perhaps there's a single taste to everything. But in terms of the world that we know, we do have two aspects of it, especially in regard to the path that we are practicing. These are frequently compared to the two wings of a bird. Many of you have heard this analogy before. So if a bird is to fly to the island of enlightenment, to make the full journey, it needs two wings. With one wing, it's incapable of going the full distance. And so the one wing, that is this compassion, that is the method side of it, it requires us to cultivate conventional bodhicitta, requires us to have that fuel, if you will, that's behind our drive to become enlightened, which is our desire to benefit others, our sincere compassion and love that wants every single being to achieve their greatest potential. On the other hand, or on the other wing, we have the wing of wisdom, which is absolutely essential if we are to kind of empower our compassion to be able to get to that goal. If we are able to achieve that, we need this understanding, this deeper awareness of the nature of reality. Without that wisdom, our compassion will be blind. It won't be fully effective. So, in the state of Buddhahood, both of those are brought together in the culminating result. We are eventually able to achieve a state where our wisdom is complete and where our compassion, our hearts are complete. These are often, you can use in our language like, the intellect or mind versus the heart and emotion. There are those kinds of aspects to each of these, but we need both of them fully engaged. So the main obstacle over here, as Glenn Mullen was saying, to cultivating this great compassion, this desire to benefit others to that degree, is our tendency to be focusing primarily on ourselves and our own needs. To live our lives with this me attitude that we just have to continually be going after what pleases and produces happiness for ourselves, blind to the fact that everyone else is bereft of that happiness as well. So the self-cherishing is the main obstacle over here. The self-grasping, which is our innate kind of holding to ourselves and all phenomena as existing in this independent, intrinsic way, is what's blocking our wisdom wing from fully developing. It's blocking that ultimate bodhicitta. So again, we're going to see this throughout the course, these kind of two elements that are both involved in Lojong. As I said, the primary one is around self-cherishing, around getting out of our own little world and embracing an understanding of the reality of all beings. So let me go through the next little bit and then we'll see if there's any questions. This is on the next slide as well from Thupten Jinpa's. This is his glossary in both the Great Collection of Mind Training, which is this huge volume. Some of you, I'm sure, have seen it. They did a condensed version that's called like the Essential Mind Training or something that's quite nice if you just want some of the main texts. There is a translation of Wheel of Sharp Weapons in there. He defines self-cherishing, and he gives it the fuller Tibetan name, which is Rang Che-Zin. So we call it Che-Zin as a short, but the Rang means self, Rang Che-Zin. The deeply ingrained thought that cherishes the welfare of your own self and makes you oblivious to others' well-being. And it kind of blinds us to the fact that all the people in London, all the people walking on the streets, taking the tube, all the people on the trains, everybody who you see in your life, we become kind of a bit cold and indifferent to their situation. Not that we're completely cold and indifferent. We break out of it occasionally. We have our moments when we extend our compassion to others. But the primary driving force for our day is thinking about ourselves and what we need for our own well-being and happiness. This is a pretty instinctual mind that we have. It tends to be operating the show a lot of the time throughout our day. The next little bit from don't change the slide yet. We'll have a little quote from Lama Zopa next. But if we continue on the page, it says there, "This is one of the twin demons that lie within our heart and serve as the source of all misfortune and downfall, the other twin demon being grasping at selfhood. These two thoughts, self-cherishing and self-grasping, are the primary focus of combat in the mind training practice. You just keep getting different people saying the same thing, but this is, again, just the emphasis we're going to place on this. Let's go ahead and look at the next slide. That is a quote from Lama Zopa, teaching he gave that was called Cherishing Others, the Heart of Dharma. He says, if we analyze, if we just think, what is the characteristic of the self-cherishing thought? What is the main characteristic of that mind? The characteristic of that mind is seeking happiness only for ourselves. Seeking happiness only for ourselves. That is the function of that mind. So this is something that, again, is primarily addressed through these teachings. If you go back to the Lam Rim presentation I just did, we can see that to some degree then, these first two levels of the stages of the path, because we are mostly looking at ourselves, mostly having this compassion for ourselves, we still have with it some of this self-cherishing, some of this wish to achieve some greater welfare for ourselves that doesn't involve the welfare of others, that isn't motivated to do that for the welfare of others. Now, when we practice the Lam Rim, we try to practice all three levels with bodhicitta, with that understanding. But somebody who is simply practicing the Buddha's teachings to achieve their own state of nirvana is not necessarily doing it with that motivation. They could be doing it solely for themselves, solely with a mind of self-cherishing. And this is where the mind of self-cherishing actually can become extremely subtle. But we'll go into that again shortly, because there is this little debate, like I said, about what is the relationship between these twin demons, these two states of mind. I also have one more quote from Ling Rinpoche. This is a more modern quote. He says, from self-cherishing comes the wish to further oneself even at others' expense. This causes all the killing, stealing, intolerance that we see around us. It is responsible for every conflict, from family problems to international wars, and for all the negative karma thus created. So this is where self-cherishing becomes much more operative. You know, we can still have that subtle self-cherishing if we're practicing a path to our own liberation and not going to Buddhahood. But at the grosser level, we have self-cherishing manifest whenever we are engaging in negative karma, especially if we're harming other beings. You know, where we think it doesn't matter that we swat that mosquito and take its life because that mosquito was harming our welfare. It was keeping us from, sleeping all night, or was going to inflict a little bite on us that we'd have to live with and scratch. And I had a lot of these when I was in Spain. They were not so pleasant, but anyway. So this is the mind that's always operative when we are engaging in negative karma, because it's not thinking about the welfare of others. It's not taking into consideration the effects that our actions will have on them. Instead, it's saying, I want that happiness, I want that thing for myself, therefore I'm going to neglect the welfare of others. That's where it becomes much grosser. But even at the subtler level, like I said, it still does play a role in keeping us from achieving full enlightenment. And let's go on to self-grasping, and then, like I said, we'll see if there's any questions up to this point. The next slide, self-grasping, this is the same definition you have on your sheet. Again, this is called daksin. This is instinctively believing in the intrinsic existence of your own self as well as of the external world. Self here means a substantial, truly existing identity. Like I said earlier, sometimes we might use the term self to refer to the self that does exist, and I'll talk about that later. But here we're mostly using it around this error that we're creating, this error that we have in regard to this self, this person, that we think exists intrinsically, exists truly, exists inherently, substantially. So, again, I think that this actually, maybe this is from a different, in believing in the intrinsic of your own self as well as of the external world. So I went up beyond that, what's on the slide. It says here, the wisdom that realizes emptiness eliminates this self-grasping. So again, this is the deeper error that is there. We're making this error in regard to ourselves as a person, but we're making this error in regard to everything, books and cups and tables and chairs and other people and so on. So let's go to the next quote that's got a nice little, again from Lama Zopa from the book Bodhisattva Attitude. He says, it is because of this ignorance, the self-grasping of the person and self-grasping of the aggregates, the basis for the person, that we have been suffering in samsara from beginningless rebirths up to now. So again, That's what the wisdom wing counteracts, is that mistaken belief in this self that is the person that is here, that we believe is here intrinsically, as well as the aggregates, the body and mind that are the basis for that person, as well as all phenomena that exist. We are continually adhering to it in a way that is fictitious. It's not in line with how it actually exists. So Lama Zopa is just, giving us his own take on what that is and how to address it. So then the final slide in this section on, actually, there's a few more. Let's stop right here and see if there's questions up to this point. Am I going too fast on any of this material? I think most of you know some of this, so I'm not. Yes, Allison.
Can you say again what metanoia means?
What? Metanoesis? Metanoesis, the definition I got from the internet, is a type of change in the mind that has the power to alter the world that we live in. Now, of course, is it altering the world that others live in? It's maybe another deeper investigation. Over time, I would think so. But it's primarily, what we experience as the world that we live in. Yeah. This is really, again, a wonderful word for what we're doing in mind training, because we're taking the world that we are engaged in and trying to see it, reframe it in a totally different way. Yeah, Adam, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this idea of bodhicitta,
Uh-huh.
we're trying to be compassionate to other people.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we know what other sentient beings really want? Whether
Yeah.
they actually want enlightenment?
Yeah.
When they reach enlightenment, do they actually get to do anything or to do what they want to do?
Yeah. Yeah, this gets into, again, we could say that some of that answer to that question is that's why we need the wisdom wing. That's why compassion on its own will be blind, because we'll be wanting to benefit others, but we don't have the means to do that. Lama Yeshe, who was the founder of our organization, says one of the most painful things about our lives is that we want to help others, but we are incapable of doing it. And this is what bodhicitta is, the answer to that. Conventional bodhicitta is to say, well, then I need to become a Buddha for the sake of others. I need to have greater wisdom so I can benefit others in the way that they need to be benefited. I guess in the Buddhist teachings, we would say that every being may not aspire for enlightenment currently. Every being may not want that as like a goal that they set in their lives, because obviously the world around us, most beings don't. Look, in London here, just a handful of us in the room who are engaged this weekend in exploring these teachings on how we try to cultivate that mind and that awareness. But the Buddha would say, this is actually what I taught on the last time I was here, the Buddha would say that we all have Buddha nature, that every single being, just by virtue of possessing a mind, has the potential to become a Buddha. So the goal in Buddhism, if you will, is the enlightenment of all beings, whether they know right now that they have the potential to become enlightened or even want to become enlightened is not as relevant as the fact that they can become enlightened. Their true potential is to become an enlightened being, to become a Buddha. In the same way, Venerable Rabina, when she teaches on it, often uses an acorn as an example. An acorn has the potential to do what? To become an oak tree, right? But you can do a lot of things with an acorn. When you were a kid, maybe you'd even paint a little face on it or decorate it or do whatever, or play some game with it. Maybe if you were kind of bad, you'd shoot it in your slingshot or something at people. But we can do a lot of things with an acorn, but the acorn's real potential is to become an oak tree. And in the same way, every one of us has a mind. Every single sentient being, this is even how we define sentient being in Tibetan language, it's sem chen, mind possessor. Another word for mind is sem, chen means to possess. So a sem chen, a sentient being, is a mind possessor. Every being has consciousness or awareness, and by virtue of having consciousness, can eventually develop their mind into the state of Buddhahood. That's what the potential of a mind is. So again, without having, there's like a whole corpus of teachings that support from that concept of Buddha nature all the way to where we're at now in this course. But there's an understanding that every being has that potential, but every being right now has things that block that potential from being fully manifest. So I use the example frequently of a glass of water. There's not as much water in this as what I might use, but if we had a glass of water, we could say that this is what our minds are like in terms of being fundamentally pure and clear. And that's what we mean by Buddha nature. But our minds right now are like this glass of water filled with dirt. And if we stir up the dirt in there, which is what our minds are constantly doing, stirring up all this crazy stuff that we have, the clarity of the water is no longer evident, right? All we see is the opaqueness from the muddy water that is there. But that doesn't mean the clarity of the water is gone. It simply hasn't been made manifest. The dirt is all there adventitiously. It's not in the nature of the water. The dirt can be removed from the water through a very fine filtration system. We can see the water, the clarity returning, the purity returning. But we have to do the work. We have to remove the impurities. It's the same with our minds. We have a fundamentally pure mind. Our minds are in that very nature of clarity and purity. But they're muddied right now, muddied by all of our self-cherishing, our self-grasping, all of what's built upon those minds, all the other deluded states, the grasping, the attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, all of these various states. But all of that can be removed from our minds. So right now, I agree with you, Adam, not every being on the street, if you ask them, do you want to become enlightened? They would say, well, no, I don't even know what that means. I'm not sure what, no, I just want to be happy. I just want to have, a pint and a whatever. They want all the things that they think bring them happiness in their life, all these external situations. Well, the Buddha says that actually, internally, we have the potential for achieving an unbelievable state of well-being. That is the state of Buddhahood. But the state of Buddhahood isn't done just for one's own achievement of that result. We achieve that result as a byproduct, but it's so that we can primarily help others to do this same work. Whether they know it now or are aware of it now isn't as relevant as our desire to help them to achieve that eventually, however long it takes. So it's a bit of, some people might call it a bit of a Messiah complex that Buddhists have that are practicing this Mahayana path, thinking we're going to save the world. Every single being is the object of this mind of bodhicitta. Every single being is a being that we need to take from their deluded state to this state of enlightenment. But it doesn't mean we go door to door trying to, convert everyone to Buddhism. We practice where we are with the situation around us. We do what we can to benefit others, both temporally and as ultimately as we can. But primarily we work on ourselves to cultivate the wisdom wing so that we can then benefit others more in line with exactly where they're at. So it's when we achieve, might be useful just for a minute to talk about the resultant state of Buddhahood then. Well, what does that look like? I talked about kind of the pure water being a reflection then of that Buddha nature, the Buddha state. In that state of full accomplishment, having achieved both of these to their greatest degree, we certainly will have our own welfare completely potentialized. We'll never degenerate to a state where we're dealing with what we're dealing with in this existence, going from life to life, never finding any real satisfaction. But, moreover, we will be imbued with the ability to benefit others, which is what comes about through our compassion. Buddhas don't kind of hang out in a Buddha land at the Buddha bar with all the other Buddhas, just, having their good old time, as a Buddha. They stay actively engaged in the world. How they stay engaged in the world is through manifesting in forms where others can benefit from it. This is where it gets a little woo-woo, as one of the students back in Taoist always says. It's a little woo-woo for me. But we talk about this compassionate wish manifesting then with this wisdom mind, having the foundation behind it, to help sentient beings in whatever way they can be helped. So a Buddha can appear as, someone on the street, if that's a way to benefit others. A Buddha can appear as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, if that's a way to benefit others. A Buddha can appear as a bird, if that's a way to benefit others. A Buddha has the potential from their side, through practicing this path that arrives at that state, to help others in whatever way is suitable to them, according to their karma, according to where they are at. So when we achieve that result, we will then have that ability, as well as the wisdom behind it, to know exactly how every sentient being can be helped in that moment. So yeah, somebody may have no awareness of Buddha, no awareness of enlightenment, no awareness of any of this, doesn't even think about their own mind. All they're doing is engaging in the outside world. But a Buddha could manifest in a way that helps them to kind of turn their minds around a little bit, start to move them in a different direction. No doubt that's happened to every one of us. We didn't know at the time, oh, this is a Buddha doing this for us, but we had beings who kind of helped our minds move in a direction towards achieving this state. So this is the goal that we are trying to accomplish ourselves, is to get to that place where we can skillfully help others to do the same work. I don't know if that fully answered your question, but maybe we can talk even lunch or sometime over the break if you have more questions. But did that help a little bit? Yeah. Yeah, Steph.
Just on the back of that.
Uh-huh.
You say that the resultant state of the book would manifest to benefit a particular being in a moment.
Sure.
In an instant.
Yeah.
In a process and a period. They're not actually manifesting as a guru as such or whatever.
Right.
Like a rainbow or something.
Absolutely.
Manifesting in the moment.
Yeah.
To bring some sort of shift in
Yeah.
the person's mind.
It's, again, a little woo-woo, but this is what is said, is that if there is the karma from the side of the being to require something and have created the causes for that to happen, if a Buddha, has some connection to that being, and there's an ability, or there's always an ability from the side of the Buddha, but if that all comes together, then the Buddhas can appear in whatever way is needed. They can be a bridge, they can be a car, they can be so we don't know the ways that Buddhas are benefiting us. Obviously, the most evident one that we go to in this tradition is the guru, in that form of a teacher who is doing the work that the Buddhas are really about, which is teaching the dharma, helping sentient beings to change their minds, to move in this direction of enlightenment, because that is our potential. But they can be benefiting us in countless ways. Sure.
I'm not going to be able to articulate it very well because it's something that you said at the very beginning.
Yeah. By the way, we have a microphone, and I haven't been repeating the questions when people ask the questions. I apologize for. Would people be okay with using the microphone? I kind of forgot about that. I'm sorry. So, again, I think they got the gist of Adam's question by virtue of what was asked. So hopefully they're okay on that. But yeah, if we can get your question on the air.
I haven't got it very clear, really.
A little closer, I
I
think.
haven't got it very clear.
That's the problem.
Yeah, just So I haven't got it very clear, but it's something I think is the idea that in terms of this text that the realization is of conventional bodhicitta, and it's on the basis of conventional bodhicitta that an ultimate bodhicitta arises. So it's
Absolutely.
sort of like it's in that order.
Right.
It's that sort of presentation gives it an order to it. So the realization first is the elimination of self-cherishing, which is the arising of conventional bodhicitta, and upon the basis of conventional bodhicitta, i.e.
Right.
the lack of self-cherishing, in very simplistic words,
Right.
the ultimate bodhicitta arises. Is that?
In terms of what we would call fully qualified ultimate bodhicitta, yes, you have to have it preceded by conventional bodhicitta. And conventional bodhicitta, as I mentioned, would have to be together with a very deep concentration, they would say generally in the nature of calm abiding or approximate to calm abiding. And one then becomes a bodhisattva. One enters the Mahayana path with conventional bodhicitta that is uncontrived, spontaneous in that way through meditation. Again, we have all these techniques for generating it prior to that. So you would cultivate that, and then eventually through the depth of your meditation, you kind of fuse your mind with that wish to become a Buddha for the sake of others, so it arises quite naturally in you. And then on the basis of that, you would eventually realize emptiness directly, and then you would have fully qualified ultimate bodhicitta. But you would, of course, study emptiness throughout your preparation to become a bodhisattva, as well as through the first few levels of the bodhisattva path.
But is it not possible to have a non-conceptual realization of the nature of reality,
Sure.
i.e. that wisdom perceiving reality, without having cultivated
Absolutely.
it, contrived?
It's completely possible to have a conceptual understanding of emptiness, the wisdom of emptiness, prior to cultivating conventional bodhicitta in this spontaneous way.
Conceptual or non-conceptual? Non-conceptual.
Did I say non-conceptual? I meant conceptual.
Yeah. You said
Conceptual.
I'm
It's
saying-
completely possible to have conceptual. Is it possible to have non-conceptual? Well, for those practitioners who complete the Hinayana path, they would have realized emptiness in that way prior to conventional bodhicitta. But for the initial practitioner who is intent upon accomplishing the Mahayana from the beginning, then they would always have conventional bodhicitta prior to their non-conceptual realization of emptiness, which is ultimate bodhicitta. They would never have a non-conceptual realization of emptiness prior to that.
Okay, thank you.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes, Amelia. Yeah, you can pass the microphone now. Just do have to hold it really close, I think, to make sure that you...
Hi, Don.
Is it on now? Okay.
This is about the self-cherishing.
Uh-huh.
So if you are, whatever is the situation where you are having a dispute with someone or a group of individuals, and of course by disputing you see, you believe what, in your view, is right, and clearly
Sure.
there is no agreement. But when by looking and developing the mind of bodhicitta, thinking of others, would that mean that while the disputation is going on, never to forget that they are also humans, they are also other beings, wishing them to be happy, despite having to
Sure,
have your
sure.
firm ground, but never let go of it, rather than being, angry and just wishing some harm, just
Absolutely.
wishing.
I think this is what we'll see as we get into the verses that explore our reaction, or changing from a reaction to these negative situations, which is our habitual going back to delusions, to the afflictions, to our anger, to our jealousy, whatever, all these, to replace that with a healthier response to whatever we experience, which is where we cultivate bodhicitta, an understanding of the other person, a sincere wish for them not to suffer. This is how this type of thing manifests. It doesn't mean, again, it's real easy to do that, but that is part of the perspective we need to bring to those situations. And it does mean still, this is the one thing we have to, His Holiness emphasizes this frequently, is that compassion doesn't mean you become, like a doormat, that everybody just walks all over you and you don't do anything. In fact, it means you become even more involved in action in the world and in responding to things in ways that are appropriate. But appropriate is the key word. If you respond or react in those more habitual ways with anger and all of that, you're not going to solve the problem. You're only going to exacerbate the suffering. Whereas if you come in with a perspective of compassion, you might still be very firm about getting that person to see what it is that they're not seeing that will help a better resolution to the situation. But you do it with compassion, you don't do it with anger. But it takes some skill to be able to do that, obviously. That's what we'll be discussing this weekend, is like, how do we confront various situations and use them as a technique to deepen our compassion for others, deepen our wish to benefit them. So the practice of Tonglen will be brought up because it's a main one that we can use in that context. But let me just go through the timing of what we're doing. I forgot to do that at the beginning. We're going to go till about 12:30, another hour, and then have our lunch break. So I think right now we're just going to take like a really short stretch break, because I think it's hard to sit for 2.5 hours just to get the circulation going, but I don't want that to be more than like 10 minutes if possible. At 12:30 we'll have our lunch break. We're going to try an hour and a half for lunch, if that's enough time for people to do what they need to do. So we'll reconvene at 2, and we'll go from 2 till 5, and we will definitely have maybe like a 20-30 minute break in the middle of that 3 hours. And that'll be the schedule for the next 2 days, as long as that works today. We'll check in at the end and make sure that works for everybody. So let's just take a short break, just a stretch break for about 10 minutes. So the clock up there says like 28 or something, 11:28, so something around 11:38. Give or take a minute or two. If I say like 20 minutes, then people will take 30 minutes. So I say 10, and then we'll work with that.